Hi, it's Jan from YouMakeItSimple.com. In today's upcycling sewing tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can take an ordinary t-shirt and make it into a tank top. I'll show you some really cool binding tips and tricks that you can apply to your tank tops to make them custom and something that you don't see every day. Very easy to do, a fun sewing project. At the end of the video, I'm going to show you how to take this simple shirt, this ordinary t-shirt, and show you a few ways to just customize it, make it unique and not so ordinary. So the materials and items that you'll need to make your t-shirt into a tank top is, of course, your t-shirt, a pair of fabric scissors, a rotary cutter and ruler if you have one, some pins or some fabric clips, measuring tape. When you're sewing on knit fabric, you'll want to use either a ballpoint tip needle or a jersey needle. And of course, corresponding thread colors for your trim and your t-shirt. And you'll need your sewing machine. I'm going to show you several different ways that you can make the tank top. On this t-shirt that I've already used the bottom part for face masks, I'm going to show you how to just do a simple rolled hem, or if you just like the cutoff look, how to cut that off and just use it like that. On this shirt, I'm going to show you how to add some binding, some really cute binding to the armhole with this particular piece of stretchy knit fabric. On this shirt, I have already cut out the sleeves, and I found this cute black stretchy knit that I'm going to add a little binding around the sleeves and maybe even the neck. And on this shirt, I'm going to do the same with a little trim of this fabric. Let's begin by simply just cutting off the sleeve. Knit fabric, t-shirt fabric, is not going to fray, so if you like that look of just the more rugged look of cut, then just cut off the sleeve. Or if you want more of a workout tank, then you can cut, of course, a deeper armhole. Obviously this would be a big t-shirt, but I'm just showing you on this sample. I'm going to show you how to do a rolled hem. Turn your t-shirt inside out and cut off the sleeve, but we're going to leave about a 1/4 inch of the fabric on the side of the seam. So I'm not going to cut on the inside of the seam. I'm going to cut on about a 1/4 inch from the seam. So I'm going to leave about that much fabric from the seam. Thread your needle with the same color of thread as your t-shirt, then you won't see the stitching. I have removed the free arm from my sewing machine just so it's easier to go around the armhole of the sleeve. If your sewing machine doesn't do that, you can still work it. I've set my machine just to a regular straight stitch. We don't need to do a stretch stitch because the armhole, it's not going to be getting stretched. Just going to start at the underarm and fold it over once and then over again. Then I'm going to be just stitching along close to the edge. Back stitch. And I don't even pin it. or clip it. See how I'm just kind of gently pulling and easing it so it's lying flat and smooth. So when you use the existing seam of the sleeve, it gives it a little bit more structure and gives it just a nice finish, just as if we had added a binding. Pretty simple. Now let's go over how to make a tank top out of this t-shirt and add some really cute contrasting binding. I have cut out the sleeves, and I have cut it out just on the outside of the seam, the sleeve seam, because that sleeve seam will give it some structure when we're adding the trim. It's easier to cut that out with the wrong side facing out, then you can see where the seam is. Now for the binding, I'm going to use this cute dress. It is polyester, and it has a bit of spandex in it, so it's pretty stretchy, and I think it's just really cute. I've used it for several other things, so you never know what items that you can use. If you like the print, save it, and I'm sure you're going to be able to find something for it. When you're using knit fabrics for binding, you want to cut it out on the stretch. So this bottom part of the dress, this is the bottom part of the dress, and it's cut on the stretch. You could, on this particular fabric, because it's so stretchy, actually cut strips this way as well. See how that stretches pretty good still. But I'm going to go ahead and cut it out because I've already cut out strips from it before, and I know that that's a straight edge. I have measured my armholes, and I just like to take the tape and fold it on its side so it curves. And this is 10 inches. So I'm going to double that, which is 20 inches, and then I'm going to subtract 1 inch. We want the binding to be just a little bit shorter than the actual armhole. I have cut these to 19 inches. They're 19 by 2 inches. And I'm going to take them to the sewing machine now and sew them together, right sides together, the short ends with the 1/4 inch seam. Now to apply the binding to the armholes, we already have the halfway points just a little past that top shoulder seam and then the bottom armhole seam. We want to find the halfway points. I'm going to use this seam as one of the halfway points and mark the other halfway point with a pin. We're placing the right sides together. The bottom seam we'll put down on the underarm. You can clip or pin, whichever way you prefer. Remember, that was just on the outside of the shoulder seam. And you can see it's smaller than the armhole, and that's perfect because we're going to stretch, and that will pull it in and give it a nice fit. And just sew all the way around, back stitching the beginning and the end of the seam. I'm going to use the edge of my presser foot as my seam allowance, which will be just 3/8 of an inch. You can pin in the middle if you want to, but I like to just pull it and ease it to where it fits, and then sew. Make sure that seam allowance is opened up and flat. Turn the right side out again. And I use this type of binding all the time. I use it with my fleece, I use it for blankets, I use it for all kinds of things. This technique just saves a lot of bulk, saves some extra steps. All you do is flip the seam towards the binding, fold the binding over, and we could have gotten away with a little bit less wide binding, but I always like to have more. It's better to have more than not enough. And you can see how we're folding it around that seam allowance, and I'm going to pin it or clip it in place, however you like to do that. We're going to go around the whole thing. And see, that just leaves such a cute binding. And I'll show you how to finish that in just a second. Go ahead and pin it all the way around, do both sides. You want to make sure that it's about the same width all the way around. You have to use your fingers and just kind of make sure that it's flat in there. So the next step, we're going to take it to the sewing machine, and what we're going to do, what I call stitch in the ditch. Starting at the armhole seam, just start stitching, back stitch, and you're going to be stitching right where the shirt and the binding meet, right in that crevice, right in that ditch. We're just going to sew all the way around. Bring your presser foot down and then turn your hand wheel towards you to make sure that the needle's coming down right in that position where you want it to be, right where the shirt and the binding meet. Remove your pins as you sew and back stitch. So you may be wondering what we're going to do with all this extra fabric that we've left from the trim. No worries. Like I say, I could have gotten away with 1.5 inches binding, but sometimes when we're folding over thicker seam allowances, you need that extra 2 inches, and it's better to have more than not enough. So how you get rid of that is we're carefully going to trim away that excess, coming as close to the seam, coming as close to the stitching as you can. So I like to lay my scissors flat and no worries, this is not going to fray. So I've applied the binding to both armholes. You can see how nice and finished it looks on both sides. I've trimmed the excess, and pretty cute. We could add the same trim to the neckline in the same fashion if you wanted to. When you're cutting the armholes out of your tank top, you can make the shoulders more narrow if you wanted to, making this scoop in a little bit more. This is a little bit wider. Some shirts I like this, and some shirts I like a little bit more narrow of a shoulder. So to add a little more character and to bring those shoulders up a bit, I'm going to take this off and show you how you can gather on the shoulder seam to add a little bit of character to your tank top and to bring those shoulders up. Just gives it a fun little twist to your tank top. So to gather that shoulder seam a bit, just take a needle, double thread it with the same color of thread as your t-shirt, knot the end, and start at the neck binding. And most t-shirts will have on the seam a reinforcement piece of fabric there. Just stitch along that, big stitches, big gathering stitches. I'm going to go to the edge of the binding and flip it around and go back the other direction just to reinforce it. And gather it how much you want it to be gathered. I have already gathered this side, so I want to make sure that it's the same distance and the same amount of gathering. I think that's good. And then knot it. If this was a little girl's shirt, instead of even sewing it, you could take a ribbon and cinch that up, tie a bow. That's pretty cute as well. If you do add a ribbon, make sure the ribbon is going over the shoulder seam, and you'd want to take a needle and thread and tack that in place. Oh, pretty cute too. Let's see what it looks like on. So I think that turned out pretty cute actually. I like the width of the shoulders now. It has cute contrasting trim. You can add that bow. You can add that bow on the shoulder seam if you really wanted to. Lots of different options, lots of different things you can do with an ordinary t-shirt. Let's move on to the other methods. The next tank top we're going to work on, I'm going to use this black t-shirt. I've turned it inside out, and I'm going to make the shoulders just a little bit more narrow instead of the wide and then gathering here. If you have a tank top that fits really well and you like the armhole of a certain tank top, take the tank top and place it on top of your t-shirt and use that as a template for the armhole. Now I know I like this, the fit of this tank top, but I do want it to come out just a little bit more. And the armholes are not going to line up exactly, but that's okay. All I'm concerned about is that top portion, getting that fit there that I like. I'm going to take my chalk pen and mark where I want to cut that. Now you can always cut more off if you want to later. Coming to the edge of the armhole of the t-shirt. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. Fold it in half. At this point, I like to just try it on and see if that is working well. Now we're going to apply the binding to the armhole. I have cut my strips out at 2 inches, and we need to measure the armhole to see how long they need to be. I'm measuring from the seam. This is 11 inches. So I'm going to double that, which is 22 inches, and then I'm going to subtract 1 inch. I have cut my strips at 21 inches and put the right sides together and sewn them together to make a loop. Now, if you didn't have a strip long enough, you can piece 2 strips of stretchy fabric on the bias in a way that's not going to be bulky. I have a special tutorial on that. You might want to check that out in case you do need to piece some strips together. Now let's apply them. Let's find the halfway point and mark it with a pin. And apply it to the armhole just like we did in the previous tutorial. And apply it just the same way that we did the other. This looks super cute just like it is, but I'm going to show you how to add the trim around the neck as well. So pretty much we're going to do the same thing with the neck edge. Fold the shirt so it's in half like this, so we can measure how big the neck edge is. That measures 9 inches. We'll double that, 18 inches minus an inch, 17 inches. I'm going to turn it wrong side facing out. Line up the shoulder seams. Find the back center point and the front center point. Mark it with a pin. Remember, we're placing right sides together. Open up the seam and place that on the back center point. Line up the edges and pin it in place. The front center point of the shirt. Pin it in place. You can see the binding is smaller than the shirt, and that's how we want it. I'm not sure if you can see very well on this fabric, black fabric or not, but you can see that the binding, the actual stretchy part of the binding, the neck binding that exists before, extends out from this point on. And then there's a seam, a top stitching seam right there. You can make, it's up to you, you can make this binding really wide, or I'm just going to cover that outside binding right here. So in order to do that, I've placed my binding strip on top, and I'm going to sew from the t-shirt side so I can see where that stitching line is, because that is where I want the fold to come over. I hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to follow the stitching line, keeping my ends even, follow that stitching line on the existing t-shirt. Remember, we're going to come to the edge of that ribbing stitch right there. So just bring your needle down and make sure it's where you want it to be before you start sewing. Back stitch. So notice how this is, the shirt is bigger than the binding. I'm going to just stretch it to where it fits just nice and they're even. And you can, like I say, pin this if you want to, but I'm just going to hold it and sew up to that point. So see the amount of stretch that I need to apply while I'm sewing. So I'm just going to pull that, the bottom, keep the ends even. If you're new to this, you might want to pin, but I find it easier just to do it this way. Sew a little and then adjust. Turn it right side facing out. Wrap it around that seam allowance. We want the seam allowance to face the binding and fold it over so it leaves that amount of trim. And you can just go around and clip those in place. We're going to stitch in the ditch just like we did before, stitching right in that crevice where the binding meets the fabric. I'm not going to pull or stretch, I'm just going to let the feed dogs pull the fabric through just naturally without any pulling of the fabric. So there wasn't too much left of the trim to trim off. So if you have a bigger neck binding and you want it wider, you'll need to cut your strips accordingly. So if this was much bigger, I would cut 3 inches or 2.5 inches instead of just 2 inches. But it worked just fine. There was plenty, and I have trimmed off just a barely like an 1/8 of an inch around the whole thing. Turned out really nice. Smooth seam. You can't even see the stitches. It looks really nice and professional. This is a great way to bind other things. Make sure you watch the tutorial where I show you how to bind blankets like this and other things. Slippers, all kinds of fun things. This is a great method to use. I'll put the link for that video in the description below. So this is what it looks like with the neck binding. It was cute with or without. You can always make that neck deeper if you wanted to. It applies the same way. Just measure that out, measure your binding, and apply it. I like to have some of my tanks with high necks and some with a low scoop. Lots of different variations, depends on what you like. It has a nice fit, like my other tanks that I like. I'm going to finish this t-shirt. I've already cut off the sleeves, and I'm going to add this black, cute black trim to it. Just follow the same instructions, but I'm going to show you what it looks like for this t-shirt. Again, make sure you're trying on your shirts before and getting the right cut before you start adding the binding. This is how this shirt turned out. I've added a cute tag on the back. Can you see that? And I love how it fits. The armholes are comfy, soft fabric, and something unique you don't see every day. I told you that I'm going to take this shirt and show you some different ways that you can embellish it a little differently than I've shown already. I know this isn't a tank top, but this is a t-shirt that I'm just going to add a little bit of trim along the bottom and around the neck, and then I'll show you how to add some cute tags. This is a lighter weight knit, and the binding that you choose should kind of match the same weight and texture as your shirt. Not necessarily the texture, but the weight. So this is a really lightweight binding. I used it on the other tank top as well, but I'm going to add that around the neck, and it's really cute to add a little bit of trim on the bottom of a short sleeve. And just follow the same instructions as you would the tank top, but we're putting it on the bottom of the sleeve. Oh my gosh, I think that is so cute. That is so unique and adds so much character to a plain red t-shirt. Now, of course, you know, if you've watched any of my other videos, I love to add a tag to your projects just to make it even more custom and put your little logo on there, put your little signature on there. I'm going to put a little J on my sleeve right there. I think that would be cute. So I've done the same thing to this black t-shirt probably 4 years ago. Have laundered it who knows how many times, and it still looks really nice. It looks really cute on the outside of my sleeve. So where this is a little bit more lightweight fabric, I'm going to stabilize the fabric by just applying a little piece of heat and bond to the back side where I'm going to apply and sew on the label. That will just give me some structure to the knit and help it lay more flat. And then I'll use a white thread so I can zigzag around that edge. Turn the steam off on your iron. Place the bumpy side of the heat and bond face down onto the back side. This is the center of the side of the sleeve where I want to apply the tag. So iron that on in place, and then I'll turn it over, take your label, and apply it where you want it to be. I have put white thread in my machine. I have changed my stitch to a very narrow and very short zigzag stitch. The width is only 1 because the border of this tag is very small. So I want to just turn your hand wheel a few times to see how that stitch is going to play out. Maybe I'm just going to do just a tad wider. And we'll see how that goes. Yeah, that's about right. And then the length is good. When you come to the corner of the tag, leave your needle down, pivot, bring your presser foot back down. Clip your threads. So I think it turned out pretty darn cute. An ordinary red t-shirt, some custom binding, and a cute tag. If you're interested in adding and learning how to make your own custom tags, make sure you watch that video. There's a couple videos that have some really great tips. It's an easy thing to do. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions when you're making up these projects, don't be afraid to leave a comment in the comment box below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click on the bell so you can be notified when I put new things up. Have a wonderful day, have fun sewing, and we'll see you next time.